In our modern world, we're living one of the greatest paradoxes of human existence. Every day, I watch thousands of people chase relationships, desperately seeking that missing piece they believe will make them whole. You see, we've been programmed to believe that loneliness is a disease and companionship is the cure. But what if I told you that the exact opposite is true? Here's what fascinates me about the human brain and consciousness. When you're constantly surrounded by others, always connected, always validated by external sources, your brain actually operates in its most limited state. You become quite literally addicted to other people's energy. And that's not just philosophy, that's pure neuroscience. Let me share something extraordinary that happened in our research. We had this participant, let's call her Maria. For 20 years, she jumped from relationship to relationship, never spending more than a few months single. I can't be alone, she told us. I just can't handle the silence. You see, Maria's brain had become hardwired to seek external validation. Her neural pathways were literally shaped by dependency. But here's where it gets interesting. When we started measuring her brain activity during our meditation workshops, something remarkable happened. After just 3 weeks of practicing conscious solitude, not loneliness, but intentional aware solitude, her brain waves changed dramatically. The constant beta wave activity, that chattering, anxious frequency, began to slow down. Her brain started producing more alpha waves, then theta waves, the same patterns we see in advanced meditators. And this is where the science becomes absolutely fascinating. In a state of conscious solitude, your brain releases different combinations of neurotransmitters. Instead of the addictive rush of dopamine you get from external validation, you begin producing sustainable levels of serotonin and GABA, the chemicals associated with genuine contentment and peace. Think about this for a moment. Your brain has the remarkable ability to evolve beyond its primitive need for constant connection. You're carrying around the most sophisticated technology in the known universe right between your ears, yet most people never learn to operate it at its highest potential. When you choose to be alone, truly alone with your consciousness, you initiate a cascade of neurological events that literally reshape your brain. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for higher thinking and emotional regulation, becomes more active. The amygdala, your fear center, begins to quiet down. And this is in theory. We can see these changes on brain scans. But here's the most important part. This transformation isn't just about being physically alone. It's about learning to be energetically self-sufficient. When you master this, something magical happens. You stop operating from a place of need and start creating from a place of wholeness. And from the moment we're born, society feeds us a powerful story. It's everywhere in our movies, our music, our books, our family conversations. The story goes like this. You're incomplete until you find the one. And you see, this isn't just cultural programming. It's literally rewiring your brain's neural circuits to create a state of perpetual seeking. Let me explain what happens in your brain when you're caught in this cycle. Every time you seek validation from another person, your brain releases a quick burst of dopamine. It feels good, right? But here's the thing, it's temporary. And so you need more and more. It's exactly the same neural pathway that creates addiction to substances. You're literally becoming addicted to other people's approval, their presence, their energy. I remember working with this brilliant scientist, Michael. He had 3 PhDs, could solve complex quantum equations in his head, but he couldn't spend a Friday night alone. You see, even with all his intellectual understanding, His brain was operating on these deeply embedded programs. Every time he felt the discomfort of being alone, his sympathetic nervous system would activate a fight or flight mode. His cortisol levels would spike, his heart rate would increase, and he'd immediately reach for his phone to find someone, anyone to connect with. And this is where it gets really interesting. When we measured Michael's brain activity during these moments of panic, we saw intense beta wave patterns. The signature of an anxious, seeking mind. But here's what's fascinating: these patterns weren't natural; they were learned responses created by years of social conditioning. You see, your brain is constantly scanning your environment, looking for cues about what's safe and what's dangerous. And society has programmed us to interpret solitude as danger. It's triggering the same survival mechanisms in your brain that your ancestors used to avoid being eaten by predators. But here's the profound truth. This is a false alarm. When we look at the quantum field, the invisible energy that connects all things, we see something remarkable. Every person is already complete, already whole at an energetic level. The feeling of incompleteness isn't coming from a real lack. It's coming from a program running in your brain that says you need someone else to be complete. Think about this. Every cell in your body knows how to maintain perfect balance on its own. Your heart beats without external input. Your lungs know exactly when to breathe. Your DNA repairs itself without consulting anyone else. You're already a masterpiece of self-sufficiency at a biological level. So why have we convinced ourselves that we need another person to be emotionally complete? The neural patterns that keep you trapped in seeking behaviors are like deep grooves in your brain. Every time you act on the urge to seek external validation, you deepen these grooves. But here's the incredible thing about neuroplasticity. You can create new patterns. You can literally rewire your brain to find completeness within yourself. This isn't about becoming a hermit or rejecting human connection. It's about breaking free from the neurological addiction to external validation. It's about recognizing that the most profound relationship you can have is with your own consciousness. There's a profound difference between being lonely and being powerfully alone. You see, loneliness is what happens when you're unconsciously separated from others. But conscious solitude, that's when you're intentionally present with yourself. And it changes everything about your brain's operating system. Let me tell you about something remarkable we discovered in our research. When someone is experiencing loneliness, their brain produces inflammatory chemicals, stress hormones flood their system, and their immune function actually decreases. But when someone is practicing conscious solitude, something completely different happens. Their brain begins producing elevated levels of BDNF, that's brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which literally helps grow new neural connections. You see, in our workshops, we regularly measure brain activity during different states of consciousness. And what we've found is absolutely fascinating. When you sit in conscious solitude, fully present with yourself, your brain waves begin to change. You move from high beta waves, the stress frequency, into narrow fields, into theta. And here's where the magic happens. In theta state, while consciously alone, your brain becomes more coherent. The different regions start communicating in harmony. It's like your neural networks are having their first clear conversation with each other, maybe ever. And this is when something extraordinary occurs in the quantum field. Let me explain this in practical terms. Imagine you're sitting alone in your room. Most people immediately reach for their phone. turn on the TV, do anything to escape that silence. But what if instead you took a deep breath and became aware of the energy field around you? You see, quantum physics shows us that consciousness isn't confined to our brains. It extends into the field around us. We had this participant, Jennifer, a corporate executive who hadn't spent a weekend alone in 15 years. When she first started practicing conscious solitude, her energy field was chaotic. We could measure this. But after just 6 weeks of daily practice, something transformed. Her coherence levels, the harmony in her energy field, increased by 300%. Her brainwaves showed patterns similar to advanced meditators. Here's what's happening at a quantum level. When you're in conscious solitude, your individual field of consciousness becomes more organized, more coherent. You're no longer fragmenting your energy by constantly seeking connection outside yourself. Instead, you're consolidating your energy, strengthening it, allowing it to become more powerful. And think about it like this. Every thought you have creates a ripple in the quantum field. When you're constantly seeking external validation, your thoughts are scattered, creating chaos in your field. But in conscious solitude, your thoughts become more focused, more intentional. You begin to create coherent waves in the quantum field. And this is where it gets really exciting. As your neural pathways rewire through conscious solitude, you begin to access higher brain functions. The prefrontal cortex, the CEO of your brain, becomes more active. You start making decisions from a place of clarity rather than emotional need. Your perception sharpens. Your intuition strengthens. You see, while the rest of the world is caught in the addiction of constant connection, you're developing a superpower, the ability to be powerfully alone. This isn't just about being comfortable with yourself. It's about accessing states of consciousness that are only available in solitude. The quantum field responds differently to a coherent, self-contained consciousness than it does to a fragmented, seeking one. When you're truly present in your solitude, you become like a quantum observer, collapsing probability waves into new realities from a place of wholeness rather than need. Here's what most people don't realize. Your emotional attachments to relationships are actually chemical dependencies in your brain. You see, every time you experience validation, connection, or even conflict in a relationship, your body produces a specific cocktail of chemicals. And just like any addiction, your cells become dependent on these emotional chemicals. Let me share something profound we discovered in our research. When someone is in an emotionally dependent state, their body is literally hungering for the next hit of relationship-based chemicals. Cortisol from drama, dopamine from validation, oxytocin from connection. It's like being on an emotional roller coaster that never stops. You see, I worked with this artist, David, who couldn't create unless he was in an emotional crisis. He'd bounce from one intense relationship to another, using the chemical high of emotional chaos to fuel his work. But here's what's fascinating. When we taught him the meditation practice I'm about to share with you, something remarkable happened. The practice is simple, but it requires courage. You sit alone, eyes closed, and instead of running from the discomfort of solitude, you lean into it. You begin to observe the withdrawal symptoms your body experiences when it's not getting its usual dose of emotional chemicals. The anxiety, the restlessness, the urgent need to reach for your phone. These are all just symptoms of withdrawal from emotional addiction. And here's where the transformation begins. As you sit in meditation, breathing deeply, staying present with these sensations, your brain starts producing new chemicals. Instead of the addictive highs and lows of relationship based emotions, you begin producing stable, sustainable levels of serotonin, GABA, and anandamide, the bliss molecule. You see, every uncomfortable feeling you experience in solitude is actually energy of potential creative force waiting to be transmuted. Think about it. All that emotional energy you've been investing in seeking, maintaining, and recovering from relationships, it can be redirected into pure creative power. Now, in our advanced workshops, we've measured the energy output of people in this state of emotional liberation. The readings are extraordinary. When you break free from emotional dependency, your body's energy field becomes more coherent, more powerful. You're no longer leaking energy into emotional addictions. Let me show you what this looks like in practical terms. Instead of reaching for your phone when you feel lonely, you sit with that energy. You breathe into it. You begin to feel it transform from anxiety into excitement, from emptiness into possibility. This isn't just metaphysical talk. We can measure these changes in brain chemistry. The most beautiful part, as these emotional patterns begin to liberate, your creative energy skyrockets. Remember David, the artist? Once he broke free from his emotional dependencies, his art completely transformed. He began creating from a place of inner fullness rather than emotional lack. His work became more authentic, more powerful, more truly his own. Let me share something remarkable about your brain's ability to change. When we studied long-term practitioners of conscious solitude in our advanced workshops, we discovered something that challenges everything we thought we knew about human consciousness. You see, the brain doesn't just adapt to solitude, it actually thrives in it. In our research, we used advanced brain imaging technology to track what happens when someone commits to regular periods of conscious solitude. And what we found was extraordinary. After just 8 weeks of daily practice, new neural networks begin forming in areas of the brain associated with self-awareness and emotional regulation. It's like watching a garden grow in real time. Let me tell you about Robert, a business executive who participated in our study. For 30 years, he operated in constant connection, always in meetings, always on calls, always surrounded by people. His brain scan showed intense activity in the default mode network, the area associated with social anxiety and self-referential thinking. See, his brain was literally wired for dependency on external input. But here's where it gets fascinating. After committing to 2 hours of conscious solitude practice daily, something remarkable happened in Robert's brain. The neural pathways associated with anxiety and external validation began to prune themselves back, while new pathways formed in the prefrontal cortex. You see, his brain was literally rebuilding itself to support independence rather than dependency. And this is where neuroplasticity becomes truly magical. When you consistently practice conscious solitude, your brain starts creating what we call self-referential stability. Instead of needing constant external input to feel balanced, your neural networks reorganize to maintain stability from within. It's like your brain develops its own emotional ecosystem. The measurable changes are stunning. We see increased gray matter density in regions associated with self-awareness. The insula, the part of your brain that helps you understand your internal state, becomes more active and more connected to other brain regions. The anterior cingulate cortex, which helps regulate emotions, shows enhanced connectivity. You see, every time you choose to sit with yourself instead of seeking external distraction, you're literally building new neural highways. It's like laying down golden paths in your brain that lead to greater self-sufficiency. And here's what's remarkable. These changes become permanent with consistent practice. In our advanced studies, we found that people who master solitude developed what we call coherent brain states. Their neural activity becomes more organized, more efficient. They require less energy to maintain emotional balance because their brains have literally rewired themselves for self-sufficiency. Think about this. Every moment you spend in conscious solitude is like a rep at the gym for your brain. You're strengthening the neural networks that support independence while weakening the ones that create dependency. This isn't just theory. We can see these changes on brain scans, measure them in brainwave patterns, track them through hormonal changes. The most profound transformation happens in the default mode network, that part of your brain that activates when you're not focused on external tasks. In most people, this network creates anxiety and rumination when they're alone. But in those who master solitude, it becomes a source of creativity, insight, and deep personal understanding. And here's the truly revolutionary part. Once these changes take hold, they become your new baseline. Your brain literally forgets how to be dependent because it's discovered something far more efficient, true self-sufficiency. Once your brain rewires for self-sufficiency, something extraordinary begins to happen. You start developing what I call the ultimate partnership, the one between your conscious mind and your quantum consciousness. You see, when you're no longer fragmenting your energy, seeking external completion, you can finally experience the profound communion with yourself. Let me share something remarkable from our research. We used advanced energy field detection equipment to measure the coherence patterns of people who've mastered this inner partnership. What we found was astonishing. Their energy field signature was completely different from those still seeking external validation. It was more organized, more coherent, more powerful. You see, Lisa, one of our workshop participants, came to us after decades of seeking completion in relationships. She described herself as a serial relationship addict. But when she began practicing self-communion, something fascinating happened. Her energy field measurements showed a dramatic shift. Instead of the chaotic, heroic signature, think about this. Every thought you have, every emotion you feel creates ripples in your energy field. When you're constantly seeking outside yourself, these ripples are fragmented, conflicting. But when you develop this inner partnership, these ripples become coherent waves, amplifying each other. It's like your energy field starts singing in perfect harmony with itself. Now, here's what happens in practical terms. When you sit in conscious communion with yourself, you begin to access different levels of your own consciousness. The analytical mind partners with intuition. The emotional body aligns with higher awareness. You create what we call a vertical integration of consciousness. And this is where it gets really exciting. Once you establish this inner harmony, you naturally begin attracting higher experiences. Not because you're seeking them, but because you're vibrating at their frequency. You see, a coherent energy field acts like a magnet for similar experiences. It's pure physics. Like attracts like. In the quantum field, in our advanced workshops, we've documented countless cases of people experiencing spontaneous expansions of consciousness once they achieve this inner partnership. Their meditation experiences deepen. Their intuitive abilities sharpen, their creative insights multiply, all because they've stopped looking outside for what can only be found within. Remember Lisa? 6 months after mastering this inner partnership, her life transformed in ways she never imagined. Here's what's fascinating. She wasn't seeking these changes. They naturally emerged from her state of self-completion. Her business thrived, her creative projects flourished, and yes, her relationships improved, but not because she needed them to feel complete. Mhm. You see, when you're in true partnership with yourself, you become a conscious creator rather than a constant seeker. Your energy field shifts from a pattern of need to a pattern of abundance. And this isn't just spiritual talk. We can measure these changes in the quantum field around your body. When you master conscious solitude, you're not just changing your own life, you're participating in the next leap of human evolution. You see, our biological drive for partnership served a crucial purpose in our survival as a species, but now we're ready for something far more extraordinary. Let me share something profound we've observed in our research. When someone achieves true self-completion through conscious solitude, their contribution to the collective consciousness changes dramatically. We can actually measure this using quantum field detectors. We've found that a person in a state of coherent solitude affects the field around them in a radius of up to 100. You see, when you transcend the biological imperative for constant connection, you begin operating at a higher frequency of consciousness. It's like upgrading your internal operating system. Instead of drawing energy from the collective field, you become a generator of coherent energy that elevates the entire field. Think about James, a participant in our advanced studies. After mastering conscious solitude, his presence alone began affecting group measurements in our workshops. People sitting near him showed increased coherence in their own brain patterns without any direct interaction. You see, a self-complete consciousness naturally uplifts the field around it. This is where evolution is taking us. We're moving from a species that needs external connection for survival to one that can maintain incredible creative power through conscious solitude. It's not about becoming isolated. It's about contributing to the whole from a place of genuine wholeness. And here's what's truly remarkable. As more people master this state, we're seeing evidence of a quantum field effect. It's like we're creating nodes of coherent consciousness that begin networking together at a quantum level. Each person who masters conscious solitude becomes like a beacon, strengthening this new field of evolved awareness. So let me show you exactly how to begin this transformative journey into conscious solitude. You see, the process starts with just 15 minutes a day. Find a quiet space where you won't be disturbed. No phone, no distractions, just you and your consciousness in pure communion. Begin by sitting comfortably and focusing on your breath. But here's the key difference. Instead of trying to clear your mind, you're going to start connecting with your future self. You see, quantum physics shows us that all possible futures exist simultaneously in the field. Your job is to connect with the version of you who has already mastered this powerful solitude. Let me share a technique we've seen create remarkable results. Close your eyes and imagine yourself 1 year from now, completely at peace in your solitude. Feel the strength, the completeness, the profound sense of self-sufficiency that future you embodies. You see, when you do this, you're not just imagining, you're actually creating quantum connections with that future state. Think about Emily, who started with just these 15 minutes. At first, she could barely sit still, but after 2 weeks of consistent practice, something shifted. She began feeling drawn to longer periods of solitude. Her brain was literally rewiring itself to crave these moments of conscious communion with self. And here's the most beautiful part: you don't have to wait years to experience transformation. Every single time you choose solitude over distraction, you're building new neural pathways. Every time you stay present with yourself instead of reaching for your phone, you're strengthening your connection to your evolved future self. You see, you're not just engaging in a practice, you're answering an evolutionary call. Your consciousness is ready to make this leap. Your brain is designed for this transformation. All that's required is your willing participation in this next step of human evolution. Remember, you're not alone in your solitude. You're a part of a growing wave of consciousness that's discovering the extraordinary power of being powerfully alone. And as you master this state, you become a living example of what's possible for human consciousness. The journey begins with your next breath.